Well, good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Responsibly Advancing the Use of AI in Clinical Trials, Current Landscape, Common Misconceptions, and Future Opportunities. My name is Ryan Muse and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. Now, the webinar is designed to be interactive and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit your questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you require any assistance along the way, you can contact me at any time by sending a message using the same chat panel. At this time, know that all participants are in listen-only mode, and please note that the event will be recorded and made available for streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank Clario, who developed the content for this presentation. Clario is a leading healthcare research and technology company that generates high-quality clinical evidence for its pharmaceutical, biotech, and medical device partners. They offer comprehensive evidence generation solutions across ECOA, cardiac safety, medical imaging, precision motion, and respiratory endpoints. For more than 50 years, Clario has developed deep scientific expertise in the most comprehensive endpoint technologies to help transform lives around the world. Now I would like to introduce our speakers for today's event. As Clario's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Todd Rudo provides medical and scientific leadership across the organization. Passionate about leveraging Clario's scientific resources to support customer success, Dr. Rudo has focused efforts on developing expertise across a range of therapeutic areas. Lauren Mistal is a business-oriented and solutions-driven legal advisor who draws on close to 2 decades of experience successfully resolving complex legal and regulatory issues. Prior to joining Clario, Lauren held senior legal and compliance roles at Mallinckrodt Pharmaceuticals and McKesson Corporation. And Gaurav Johnson leads the R&D team at Clario as a senior vice president focused on innovation and next generation technology solutions, including AI capabilities. She has more than 2 decades of experience working in the clinical trial space, leading strategic technology initiatives. But now, without further ado, let's just go ahead and hand things over to our first speaker for today. Dr. Todd Rudo, you may begin when you're ready.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. And just to confirm, slides are showing?
We can see them.
Great, thank you. All right, well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We're absolutely thrilled to have such a great turnout today for the session and looking forward to the discussion. And of course, we will definitely include some Q&A time at the end. Before we start, I just wanted to share with you all the results of the pre-meeting survey we opened via LinkedIn. Many of you responded, thank you. And we asked, what's your greatest concern when it comes to using AI in clinical trials? The interesting thing is that there was actually nearly an even split towards concerns for patient data privacy, concerns for the accuracy and reliability of data when AI is employed, and ethical considerations as well. And the good news here is our intended agenda for today is going to hit on all of these points, actually. And please, of course, do, as I said, fire away those questions in the Q&A as we go through this if there's anything that comes up that we miss. So for our agenda, Gaurav's going to get us started. Just kind of a brief refresher on terminology. What is AI? What is machine learning? I'll then talk about how we're viewing AI, its applicability in the clinical trial environment. One piece that's particularly important, and about a third of you said you were concerned about data accuracy, is training data sets, right? So we'll talk a bit about sort of proper selection of training data set. And then we'll hear from Lauren to share holistically our approach to AI development with respect to responsible use. She'll also talk about the current regulatory landscape. The responsible use principles, by the way, they also get at some of the concerns flagged in that survey: patient privacy, ethical considerations, data accuracy. And then last, we'll get to the really exciting stuff, which Gaurav is going to share examples of how AI has really moved the needle in terms of capabilities, and get into some specifics that we've been working on. So Gaurav, I will turn over to you.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you, Ryan, for the introduction. I am absolutely thrilled to be here and have the opportunity to talk about a topic that is close to my heart. I'm very passionate about. AI is revolutionizing the world, and this is really the opportunity to reinvent across industries, even outside of clinical trials. Pretty much, we are at a turning point where every task across industries at some point in the future is going to be impacted by AI. I have been in the clinical trial space for more than 20 years, and there is not one day that goes by when I'm not thinking there is so much more opportunity to accelerate every single step in the process. And this is where I feel with the advances in technology, AI can really help us accelerate solving complex problems. Before we dive deeper into applications of AI for clinical trials, I want to touch upon the very basic. What is AI? Artificial intelligence enables machines to perform tasks that involve human intelligence. With advances in technology, various complex tasks that would take humans hours to perform, now AI models can be trained to do them within minutes, if not within seconds. This is where I feel the opportunity is really big. The possibilities are infinite at this point. Under the AI umbrella, we have technologies like machine learning, deep learning, artificial neural networks. Machine learning is more like an overarching, and then deep learning is where you need to solve more complex problems. And artificial neural networks are pretty much the building blocks of deep learning. These technologies are implemented based on the problem, based on the complexity of the problem that is being solved. Typical examples of machine learning would be product recommendations, spam filtering. Examples of deep learning leveraging artificial neural networks would be image recognition, speech recognition, disease detection within the image data set, etc. Gen AI definitely came up very fast and I feel is the most capable AI till date and really helping move the needle even further. It's basically large language models pre-trained on massive amounts of data set and having capabilities to do many functions out of the box. With that, I'll hand it back to Todd.
Okay, great, thanks. So as I mentioned, in the last maybe 15 minutes or so, Gaurav's going to take us through some specific examples. But ahead of that, I just wanted to set the stage a little bit here, how we're thinking about this all. So we've established three sort of major focus areas for development. AI intended to enhance data privacy, AI used to improve efficiency, and last and arguably potentially most importantly, AI used to improve data quality. On the privacy side, I think it's pretty straightforward. This is about using AI to ensure the protection of personal data, to ensure that it's fully removed from any uploads from sites. So that could be just a PDF, a still image, a video image, with facial features, or even some complex cross-sectional imaging, but making sure that's fully de-identified. And what's exciting here is the tool's ability to do so prior to our receipt of the data. So the private information never leaves the site. And I would say equally important in this technology is the lack of any increased burden to the site, right? So these are algorithms or elements of the software that run without any additional human intervention needed. And so, the site doesn't need to, for example, identify what needs to be redacted versus not. It's all part of the AI package. Regarding efficiency, of course, some of this is about our own internal efficiencies, but much of this is beneficial to customers directly as well. So for example, you can imagine turnaround time for image processing could be faster if we can augment the radiologist's ability to read an image, or generative AI applications that could help us in developing documents like imaging charters or site training documents. All of that, if it can be done quicker and more efficiently, could positively impact study startup time, for example. Again, something really critically important to customers. And then on the data quality, that sort of third focus area, as I said, probably the most impactful piece, at least in my view, and arguably of the highest importance to sponsors as well. The work here can really make a difference in terms of detecting problems with data quality at the time of data acquisition. So when that image is acquired, when that ECG is acquired, and flagging that quality concern right away, nearly real time, rather than the current paradigm where it could be hours or days or even weeks later, at which point a human finally looks at that and says, hey, there's a problem here, right? So you can see quickly how this could really reduce things like missing data in a clinical trial data set, where low quality just has to be, essentially removed from the data set, or just improving the overall quality of data as well, even if not quantity per se. So those are the three sort of areas of focus that we'll be talking about. With that background set, I'm going to shift gears just slightly for a few minutes here. I alluded to this in the introduction. It came through in the pre-webinar survey as well. People are reluctant to trust AI in some cases, and there's good reason for that. It's not just paranoia essentially, but there are plenty, countless examples actually where AI-enabled algorithms get it wrong. And there's reasons for this, and most often it comes down to what I'm about to talk about here, which is the training process, and more specifically, the selection of an appropriate training data set. So there's this concept, right? AI-enabled algorithms will only be as good as the data that they're trained on. That's not that difficult of a concept. How can it know something that it was never taught? But there's one more element that's often overlooked, and that is the training data set reflective of the intended use of that algorithm? So I tend to teach through examples. So think of a scenario where an algorithm is being trained to recognize ECG limb lead reversal. Happens incredibly commonly. A technician picks up the electrode, which is labeled RA, right arm. They pick it up with their right hand without sort of actively thinking, and that right hand then attaches the lead to the patient's left shoulders, right? So now you have a reversal of right and left. We have lots of examples of ECGs in our database of this, and we could certainly train an algorithm using those ECGs, but not all populations are the same. So what if we trained that algorithm purely using adult ECGs, right? Clearly we have more adult than pediatric subjects in clinical trials we've supported. If we use adult ECGs and train that algorithm on 1 million ECGs, and then we take that algorithm and we deploy it in a clinical study that has a mixed population, right? Or even just a pediatric study, how will that algorithm perform when it sees the ECG of a 1-month-old baby? We don't know because it hasn't been trained on that. And algorithms don't necessarily say, I'm not sure. They essentially can make it up, right? There's this concept of hallucination if you read a bit about AI. And so saying an algorithm is trained on 1 million ECGs isn't enough. That doesn't make it bulletproof. You have to really kind of think about the quality and the diversity of the data that went into training that algorithm, and then be cognizant of that when thinking about the intended use. How are we going to use this algorithm? Well, how was it trained in the first place? That's an ECG example. There's you can imagine in the imaging space, let's say you have an algorithm that's been trained on prostate cancer studies, right? And looking at liver metastases in prostate cancer. And now you take that algorithm and you deploy it in a protocol that allows mixed tumor types, sort of any solid tumor, but still you're looking at the liver. Well, you don't really know how well that's going to perform in detecting those liver metastases if it's only been trained on one tumor type. So again, having that sort of forethought, if you will, to think about how an algorithm is trained versus how it will be deployed. There's one more point I wanted to make before I hand to Lauren to talk about responsible use principles, one of which actually is minimizing bias, and that's clinical trial diversity, or just diversity in general. You heard me describing just now the risk for bias in AI, and essentially I was kind of right around that topic of clinical trial diversity as well. We just established that a diverse training data set is more robust, of a training data set, since you're exposing that algorithm as you're training it to not just more of the same, but rather more variety. So when we talk about diversity in clinical trials, as opposed to diversity in AI training data sets, the parallels here, well, they start to become pretty clear, right? So if the trial population is very narrow, let's say all white males, are the trial results applicable to all populations or just applicable to white males? It's the parallel, as I said, to AI bias. If the AI algorithm has only been trained on one particular population, will it, effectively work when applied in other populations? So the good news here is we're making some progress. This is, specifically about demographic data in clinical trials. It's a joint publication. We collaborated with Ken Getz at the Tufts Center for the Study of Drug Development. And what we saw is that the reporting of demography in clinical trials has improved over time. We went back to 2007 and looked forward from there. The actual representation is still lagging behind significantly. So we have better quality data to show the lack of diversity, and we now have the ability to track this well because clinical trialists are reporting it, but still certainly progress to be made. So why does all of this matter? It's not just about equity and inclusion, it's about trusting the results of a study. Generalizing study results to all populations can be risky, whether you're talking about efficacy or safety. I'll start with, as a cardiologist, I'll start with a blood pressure example, thinking about medicines to treat high blood pressure. So hypertension, high blood pressure isn't the same across all races. The mechanisms behind high blood pressure differ between patients, one to the next, including across race. And therefore, deciding what's the best treatment for a particular patient can't simply be a one-size-fits-all type approach. And in fact, if you look at the current guidelines for selecting a blood pressure drug, the first question that those guidelines ask is, what's the patient race? So Black patients respond better to different classes of medications than white patients. But there's only one reason we know that, and that was a 33,000 patient study. About a third of the patients in that study were Black subjects. And through that large data set, we were able to see there's actually a difference in how quickly they respond to different first-line medications. So that's an example of where efficacy data is impacted if your trial population is too narrow. On the safety side of things, the breast cancer story here probably is the most powerful one. Only about 3% of all breast cancer study participants are Black, yet Black women have 41% more likelihood to die from breast cancer. They have a higher risk of the worst type of breast cancer called triple-negative breast cancer. And it wasn't until 2017, actually, which is not that long ago, sadly, that a study of about 2,000 subjects enrolled 400 African-American women. So 20% of the study population versus the 3% that I just mentioned. Well, in that study, it became clear that Black women had a higher rate of a particular side effect. And that side effect is significant enough that the investigators had to reduce the dose of the chemotherapy that they were receiving. You can imagine if you reduce the dose of a chemotherapy drug, you also reduce the efficacy. And so the outcomes for Black patients, therefore, are worse than white patients because they're effectively being undertreated. That's because of a difference in safety, a difference in side effect. So again, unless the clinical trial population was diverse enough to and enrolled enough patients to start to analyze subgroups, you would have no way of knowing that information. So again, just a couple examples of why diversity is so important in clinical trials when it comes to efficacy and safety, and the parallel there between, although that was a bit of a tangent perhaps, the parallel there in terms of AI algorithms and training data sets and thinking about the diversity within them as well. So I'll hand over here to Lauren. I mentioned the importance of minimizing risk for bias, and Lauren's going to talk about that, plus our other responsible use principles that we're quite proud of. So go ahead, Lauren.
Thank you, Todd. And thank you to XTalks, as well as obviously Todd and Gaurav for including this topic, I think, in this webinar, which is so important, and which is how to make sure we're using this technology responsibly We at Clario are very committed to ensuring that our ongoing use of this technology, which is for Clario not new, we have a wealth of different types of algorithms and models that we've been using and developing for quite some time. And for us, we've always been committed to things like patient diversity, as well as patient privacy and other issues. So for us, the commitment that we are showing and getting behind with regards to responsibly using AI, I'm glad we're having the opportunity to talk a bit about that here today. Our responsible use principles, we have developed these cross-functionally, internally, partnership, not only between my team, the legal team, but also obviously with our medical and science team, our R&D team, our data scientists and others, quality, our QA function, IT. So we really have taken a cross-functional approach to developing these principles, which are available also on our website. This is, you can see, we are committed to fair and equitable use, being transparent, being respectful in our use of AI, continual monitoring and detecting, as well as being adaptable. So I'll touch briefly sort of on what each of these pillars means to Clario. In terms of being fair and equitable in our use of AI and development of AI, obviously Todd just talked at length about one of the most important aspects here, which is ensuring that we're doing what we can to use the most diverse training sets available to ensure that we are, addressing bias where we can. I think one of the big issues here around bias is, and Todd also just touched on this, is the training and deployment of these models really is only as good as the wealth of the data and the diversity of the data itself. And so I think as an industry, we all need to be ensure that we're doing better and continually committing to making sure that the patient populations are in fact diverse for trials, and that the data usage, that there's a commitment to ensuring that the data is available to be used to train the models to eliminate or at least minimize bias. In terms of transparency and accountability, for us, that means, in talking consistently and continually with our R&D teams, we want to make sure that we understand, what is it the model actually does, what are the outputs that it's shooting out, and how is it essentially generating those outputs, and really being able to make sure that we can explain what the models do, what the objective is, and that the output is in fact aligned with what the objective is. Privacy, at Clario, we have a long commitment to ensuring that we put privacy at the forefront of what we do. We have a very robust data privacy program. We ensure that we are using only anonymized data for training, and really are making sure that people understand the importance of not being able to obviously trace any data back to any individual or any particular stakeholder. In terms of monitoring and detection, one thing that's critical is that we continue to have human oversight of the models. We need to make sure that the models are always performing as expected. We talked a bit about ensuring accountability. Part of that is, we need to understand how the model is how it's supposed to work, and then continue to monitor to make sure it's continuing to work as intended. And then finally, the regulatory landscape, which I'm going to talk a bit more about in a moment. It is, to put it very, very bluntly, constantly shifting. And so we are committed to ensuring that we're staying on top of legal and regulatory developments, not only as laws come into force, but also in terms of guidance to ensure that we're staying on top of the different principles and requirements that are out there, and integrating those into our own use and development of AI. So in terms of the regulatory landscape, as mentioned, it is evolving constantly and quickly. There is no law currently on the books anywhere in the world that directly regulates AI. The closest thing right now is the EU AI Act. There was a political agreement that was reached at the beginning of December of last year by the European Commission, with finalization of the act expected sometime this year. European Parliament, in fact, is expected to vote in the spring of this year. And if, in fact, there is the law is passed as drafted, it is expected that it would be published around September of this year. And then there's essentially a 2-year effective period. So about 24 months during which the law would ultimately come into effect in the EU, and obviously governing the use of data of EU citizens, certainly. So in the United States, what we currently have is really a patchwork, and you can see we've had different, types of regulators and political bodies sort of weighing in on what is AI, what should be regulated, how should it be regulated. The White House has put out a blueprint for AI and the Bill of Rights that came out in 22. And then more recently, President Biden's executive order, which offers really high-level direction on how AI systems can be used and should be developed. Interestingly, the executive order itself, it tasks over 50 different agencies, federal agencies, with carrying out 100 discrete AI-related tasks. So quite a bit of sort of direction to a number of different regulatory bodies in the United States. All of which are, have their own sort of marching orders, everything from the Department of Defense to obviously FDA, HHS, trying to make sure that they're doing what they need to be doing to stay on top of the technologies that are used in their different industries. At the state level, there are a lot of existing laws around data privacy in particular and consumer protection. And that tends to be the types of legislation where we're seeing that there's probably going to be some sorts of amendments or addressing of AI, but obviously nothing really concrete in terms of an AI rule at the state or law at the state level at this point. You've also got non-binding guidance and statements from agencies like FDA and other federal agencies. The FDA, I recently attended a discussion and from where CEDAR presented, and there was a discussion around the fact that FDA does appreciate the difference between the different applications of AI, and really is focusing their efforts on ensuring that their regulatory focus is on uses of AI that really could impact data integrity, patient safety, drug efficacy, as well as any AI-enabled medical devices. So the FDA does acknowledge that there can be, as Todd already touched on, a real good use of AI for increasing efficiency and increasing quality, and that those types of use cases, efficiency-focused types of use cases, even in the clinical trial context, are more than likely sort of not going to be the main focus of the FDA. So, but again, the overarching message here is a lot going on in this in the AI regulatory space, and obviously everyone who is keeping on top of these things is watching what happens with the EU AI Act. In the United States, there's been different congressional hearings around trying to get some sort of federal legislation. At this point, there is nothing even close. I sometimes, comment that we don't have a federal level privacy law. So to think that we might have a federal level AI law anytime soon, it seems rather unlikely. Looking a little bit more at the White House, what they put forth, I think that the big message here is just to highlight that our own Clariozone responsible use guidelines are really in line with what the expectation is in the United States right now around the development and use of AI. There's a focus, obviously, on ensuring that these systems are safe and effective, obviously doing everything we can to address systemic bias or discriminatory outputs, a focus continually on privacy and ensuring that individuals have the ability to understand if their data is being used and how it's being used and have some voice in that. The ability to obviously be transparent and be able to explain the technology, how it's deriving or generating the outputs. And then finally, making sure that there is human oversight to ensure that the models are being deployed as intended and are in fact functioning as intended, and that the outputs are what they should be. Lastly, just to kind of put a sort of a summary on all of this in terms of the regulatory and legal landscape, there really is, as I alluded to with FDA's approach, an appreciation that in order to regulate AI, there's going to have to be an understanding that there are different use cases, and those different use cases really have different levels of risk associated with them. So, for the EU AI Act, there is, and you can take a look. The bill is out, so you can look at the language. There is actually going to be a prohibition on certain high-risk types of uses of AI that are determined to potentially have a very significant, potentially negative impact on fundamental human rights. When you think about the risk spectrum A great example, there's a couple things you could think about, right, in terms of risk and the risk spectrum. So Gaurav already mentioned, you can use AI for things like spam detection. That obviously is a much lower risk application than potentially using an AI model or algorithm for disease detection, right? Much higher risk if there's an error in the model, missing something out of your spam filter and having it come through to your inbox, right? Versus the potential risk of missing a disease presentation in a human. So that gives you a great sense. Another great example is, slightly more nuanced, but, using AI to potentially determine health insurance eligibility versus, using it to determine the dosage of a medication that a patient should receive versus using AI. Those two would probably arguably be higher risk cases, right? Versus using AI to draft physician notes following a physician visit, where the AI can actually note what the dosage was that the physician prescribed, right? The practitioner actually developed the dosage, but the AI helped track it in the notes. So approach globally is really focused on risk at this point. And again, everything from what we're seeing in the EU with actually prohibiting certainly very, very high risk cases to things like requiring registrations around different middle risk types use cases of AI. And the concerns here continue to be everything that we've talked about, really making sure that people are attuned to and doing everything they can to eliminate bias, preventing inaccurate outputs, ensuring that there's transparency, and ensuring that data privacy and security remain at the forefront of the development and deployment of this technology. So thank you. I think I'm going to hand it back over to Gaurav.
Thank you, Lauren. That's definitely very insightful. Moving on to how we are leveraging AI to transform the way we work within clinical trials. I'm excited to share the current landscape at Clario is we have 52 proprietary AI models that we build in-house, working closely with our science experts across our business units. We are currently using these AI models on 500 plus trials in production. And to Lauren's point, we have established AI ML ops that's constantly monitoring the outputs. There is a certain accuracy that the model started with, but as you run the model on production data, you want to make sure it's still maintaining the high level of accuracy where it passed the gate to begin with, that it's ready to be put in production. We started the AI journey back in 2018. So we've been pretty much doing AI for more than 6 years right now. The initial focus was more on establishing strong AI infrastructure, fully cloud-based, GPU-powered, then establish strong training data infrastructure. To Todd's point, we have to make sure we eliminate bias as much as possible. So the training data has to be rock solid. And then there are also efforts to augment that training data to get higher level of accuracy from the AI model. Last couple of years, we've really been able to accelerate based on the foundation, the strong foundation that we laid initially. And now working very closely with Lauren's group, our legal team, we've established AI use working group in sync with our commitment to use of AI responsibly. Moving on, in terms of the overall concept, as we look at the whole pipeline, like every single step in the core lab process where we can introduce AI while still maintaining human overseeing. This is very important. None of these AI models are replacing humans. Their focus is pretty much speed and quality, to make sure we speed up the process as much as possible while ensuring quality, as well as also standardizing outcome of every single task. Some examples that I want to walk through in this pipeline are near real-time QC at the site level. As the data is being collected, is being uploaded, the ability to provide real-time QC, making sure that the data is in compliance with the protocol, what the protocol is expecting, and if not, then having the ability to display a message to the site user, providing them with an ability to address the issue there and then. Instead of, in the olden days, this would be multiple days somebody looks at the data manually and then issues a manual query back to the site. So the back and forth between the site, which would take multiple days, reducing it to minutes, if not seconds. Another use case I want to highlight is de-identification. We can definitely strengthen de-identification as well as streamline it even further to gain speed as well as accuracy. Patient privacy is definitely paramount. It's always front and center to everything that we do, as well as it's an expectation from the clients, very close to them as well. AI models can help us with patient privacy as well. Some examples that I want to highlight are video redaction, still image redaction, our MRI facial blurring, and image de-identification. Again, steps in the process where AI can make things quicker as well as give us more confidence, but not replacing humans. Moving on, our next big pillar is data quality. Some examples I want to highlight for data quality are anatomical coverage model, where as the data, the AI model can pretty much scan through the slices and make sure the correct modality is being submitted as is expected by the protocol, as well as anatomical coverage, the slices we are expecting, we are getting those. If not, it can be flagged upfront, giving an opportunity to address the issue. Another model I want to highlight is our patient verification model. Comparing the data sets with prior time point and making sure the data set is for the same patient as is being submitted to. If not, then again, displaying a message and then providing an opportunity to correct. The approach here is pretty much shift left as much as possible. Another use case is motion detection. Motion artifacts can be detected by AI models, and again, replacing multiple days with a matter of minutes. Next slide, please. Now I want to switch gears from the imaging use cases to a cardiac use case. Our EPQT AI model, early precision QT AI model. This is our AI model where we are able to check the quality of the ECG data. We split the ECG data, we get the epoch score, and make sure we have high confidence in the ECG data that is being collected. This can avoid surprises later on when a decision is made to go to overreads. It's too late to correct the data at that point, thus providing the opportunity to the sites and the clients to check the quality upfront has tremendous value. Next slide, please. Improving efficiencies in clinical trials. Everything I'm talking about pretty much relates to speed and quality. Auto segmentation and image preparation pretty much lay the foundation for gaining efficiencies in multiple steps in the process. Auto labeling sets us up for success, being able to identify the image data, slice and dice the data, and then able to act on that data with a follow-up AI model is a huge advantage. For our read assist AI models, where we can speed up things for the readers, making it easier for them doing the cumbersome tasks for them upfront, while still they get the chance to do a read and make sure that the output of the AI model is accurate, as well as the ability to modify the output of the AI model if needed. So region of interest, custom segmentation models, assisted oncology are some of the examples of our read assist models. Now I want to zoom into our assisted oncology AI model. For solving this problem, what we are doing is we are slicing it into multiple parts. Our first step is the radiologist creates the lesions on the baseline time point, and then the AI model can very accurately, with 98.4% accuracy, predict the slice on the follow-up time point where the lesion would exist. This makes the reads more efficient as well as leads to consistency between the reads, which relates to inter-reader variability as well as intra-reader variability. The next step would be to actually propagate the lesion from the baseline time point to the follow-up time point. And further, another next step would be to actually also do disease detection on the baseline time point itself. Next slide, please. Another one I want to highlight is our UC AI model, which I am quite excited about, looking at the results and comparing the accuracy of the model with the human accuracy that we see. Our assisted GI UC reads, it's AI-based quantitative UC Mayo scoring. The AI model computes the Mayo score, displays it to the reader, and then the reader has the opportunity to modify it as needed. But overall, this makes the process, this makes the reads much more efficient in terms of the AI model computing the score, as well as this would overall help increasing consistency and reducing the inter and intra observer variability. Now I want to switch to Gen AI. Gen AI, large language models, is definitely the most capable AI till date. Out of the box, these large language models are trained on massive amounts of data and they have great capabilities. With Gen AI, we are at a point where at some point, pretty much everybody can have a virtual assistant that's trained for their specific task. Being in a compliant industry, we want to make sure which are the use cases we want to go after for solving using Gen AI, the ones that would actually move the needle. For Gen AI, the use cases that we are prioritizing are the ones that would reduce site burden, as well as the ones that would enhance patient experience. Patient and sites are definitely prime important in the whole process, and as much burden that we can reduce from them, I feel we add value and to the success of clinical trials overall. It's a very fast evolving team. There are LLMs from big players, and then some LLM is great. I don't think there's going to be one LLM that's going to rule across all use cases. So we will have to be very careful to pick which LLM we deploy for solving a certain problem. Based on the problem, we will have to define which LLM is the best to deploy. Another point I want to make, next slide, please. AI needs efficient workflow. It's one thing to implement a great AI model, have a high accuracy. At the same time, we need to use it efficiently within a workflow. To get the best value out of an AI model, we have to deploy it in a place where it adds value and does not take anything away from the overall process. This is where I feel Clario, with its years of experience and such a strong science bench, we are able to determine, first identify the training data, the correct training data to solve a problem, augment it as needed, and then what step in the process can we replace with the AI model while always maintaining human overseeing. With that, I'll hand it back to Ryan and open it up for questions.
Well, thank you very much for that insightful presentation. I'd like to invite our audience to continue to send their questions or comments right now using the questions window for this Q&A portion of our webinar. Now, I've already received some questions from the audience, though, so we'll get ourselves started with those. And Gaurav, to get us started, I've got a question here for you. Someone wants to know, what do you see as the future in clinical trials with respect to using AI to read radiology studies rather than needing multiple readers?
That's a great question, Ryan, and I feel it is pretty much on a lot of people's minds, so I'm glad it's been asked here. I would say AI can accomplish complex tasks within seconds, minutes, as I have alluded to. And thus, the biggest opportunity is to assist the readers, where we take away the burden of cumbersome tasks from them. At the same time, we still maintain their expertise, where they have the final say. AI is not at a point where it can just be, you can just leave it alone. We absolutely need to maintain human oversight, expert oversight, before we can to conclude, especially to Lauren's point, as it relates to disease detection, to scoring. I feel we have to continue to maintain that expert human oversight.
All right, very good. Thank you so much for that answer. Todd, I have a question here for you. Someone says that they start by saying that you mentioned a lot of different ways that AI could be helpful with imaging, such as quality and privacy. The question is, are there other areas beyond imaging that you see this as helpful, since some therapy areas aren't usually needing imaging in their clinical studies?
Yeah, it's a good question there. And thanks for asking that. There's a couple that come to mind immediately, both as I sort of hinted to earlier. Data quality, I feel, is the sort of greatest opportunity here. So one we didn't talk about today, Ed, is pulmonary function testing. For those not familiar, in clinical trials, often a tool is used to measure the flow of air, whether that's an asthma study, for example, or an emphysema study. And one of the challenges with that as a measured endpoint in a clinical study is it's very dependent on patient effort, right? So you can imagine how I could just try harder after I've been started on a drug, and it would look as if the drug is that the drug is working, essentially. So there's a need when using pulmonary testing in a clinical study to ensure the maximal effort was put forth by the patient at every time point, not just at the on treatment time points. There's a set of criteria to do this. It involves, in sort of current workflows, a human to essentially look at the loop, what's called a flow volume loop, and assess for evidence that it's a sub-maximal, meaning an effort that wasn't fully completed. Well, you can imagine the use of AI here and how powerful it can be, and something we are deploying in clinical trials is the ability to use AI to immediately assess that patient effort and give feedback right away, saying, yes, that was a good quality exhalation, or no, that was not sufficient quality, try again. And using that to be able to alert the patient or alert the site, if it's a site-based data point versus a home-based data point, using AI to ensure the maximal effort at every measured time point, again, therefore reducing the risk for missing data, or importantly, reducing the risk for low quality data mixed into the data set. Another example quickly, well, Gaurav already spoke about actually the EPQT quality score, which is a way of looking at continuous ECG data. I'll elaborate on that a little bit. One of the ways in phase 1 or early phase clinical studies to collect the ECGs, instead of collecting individual 10-second ECGs, is just to use a continuous recording for an entire 24 hours. And then in the lab, we go out and extract 10-second ECGs at all of the time points that we're interested in. Taking that a step further, you can imagine how we could do that continuous recording technique in a phase 1 study, but actually take that data and simply park it on the shelf and say, in the future, when this drug goes further along in development, we're going to analyze the ECG data from phase 1, but we're not going to analyze it today. Well, imagine if the sponsor is very confident because they've done the responsible thing, they've collected that high quality data during phase 1, and they think that sitting on the shelf is complete data for all of the patients. But what if there was a problem, right? What if there was an issue with the recording that hadn't been recognized because the workflow never involved any human overread? It was simply collect and store. This tool that Gaurav spoke to, and I'm just kind of describing the use case perhaps a little bit further, this tool is able to quickly assess prior to sort of declaring that data sufficient and putting it on the shelf, quickly assess the entire 24-hour recording for periods of poor data quality. Limb lead reversal was something I talked about as a potential use. Just artifact because one of the leads fell off halfway through the night and nobody recognized it, All of these are things that an AI algorithm could quickly detect without needing to take the time and resource and expense of having a human view every single one of those. So there's a lot beyond imaging. To go back to the original question, certainly that we're working on. The imaging examples make for really nice, pretty pictures, and that's how they often, make it into these things. But thanks for that question.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that answer. I'm sure they appreciated that. I think we can all appreciate the discussion of Clario's responsible use guidelines. And Lauren, I have a question for you. Someone is wondering if you can comment a little more on how Clario is protecting patient privacy when developing and using AI models.
Yes, I mean, this, as I did touch on, is something we've been very much attuned to for many years. We've had a robust privacy program in place at the company. One thing that is, helpful from a mitigating sort of perspective for us is we typically only process key-coded data. So we don't typically get, what under US rubric one would consider PHI or PII, right? Personal health information or personally identifiable information. We typically have key-coded data, and we're not able to retrace that data back to the patient. It's the sites that know the patients and potentially the sponsors of the trials, right, who know the patients, not Clario. And Todd also touched on, as did Gaurav, both. We're deploying some of this technology, in fact, to ensure that we are going further to protect privacy. So for us, privacy has always been at the forefront of our compliance efforts. We have a very, strong internal culture of making sure people are aware of the importance of protecting privacy. And from the AI use perspective, we are anonymizing the data, which again is already key coded. So for us, it's divorcing it fully from any ability to potentially retrace the data back. But again, since we don't have the re-identification key, that's an additional step that we're taking. And then we are building, the privacy. We are building the use of AI into our data privacy impact assessments. So we are ensuring that there is an additional level of check to make sure patient privacy is protected as we're, training models and developing new AI use cases.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much. Todd, I have another question here for you. Someone's curious, is there a goal for diversity in training data sets that developers should work towards? And really just how many records from different race and ethnic groups is enough?
Yeah, that's a good and actually a fairly common question. That's sort of how much data is enough data, and then taking that a step further to saying how much data is needed from a diversity standpoint to call your data set diverse, right? So this is a challenging one, and there's not a one-size-fits-all answer, but I think there's one key message to take home here, and it's applicable for clinical trial diversity as well as AI training data set diversity. And that's thinking about the intended use, right? So if you think about a disease, you have to think about what is the epidemiology of that disease, right? What percentage of males versus females are affected? What percentage of Asian versus Black versus white patients are affected? And your trial population should reflect that, or your AI training data set should reflect that. So it's not necessarily that there's an absolute number, but you need to do a little bit of homework to understand the epidemiology of the disease, and make sure when you're well, in the case of recruiting a clinical trial, or in the case of developing an AI algorithm, make sure you're cognizant of those proportions in your training data set as well.
All right, thank you so much. Gaurav, I've got a question here, curious about how receptive have sponsors that you've worked with been to the use of AI in their clinical trials? Are there some uses that they've maybe been more reluctant for than others?
Sure. So in our experience, so far, sponsors have been enthusiastic and interested in the use of AI to achieve efficiencies while still maintaining the human overseeing. They're excited and appreciate Clario's commitment to utilize AI responsibly, focusing on the value add in terms of speed and consistency. So I feel the response has been pretty positive so far from our clients.
That's good. That's great. Very good to know. Now, Lauren, a question for you. AI by nature can continuously improve as more and more training of the algorithm is done. So for clinical trial use, is this something that you've thought about? And if so, is it advantageous, or could it present some problems?
This is a really interesting question, and I think it's one that certainly regulators are going to be grappling with, particularly those that are like FDA or EMA that are really tasked with, uses in the clinical trial context. I think this certainly can pose an issue, right? If you have a model that's developed and first patient in, it's a certain sort of model, and then you're continually training and potentially tweaking and improving the model potentially, right? Throughout the course of the trial, there could be sort of a difference, right, with how the outputs of the model sort of as the trial is ongoing. Some of these trials obviously can last many, many, many years. And so interestingly, I think, EMA has sort of taken the position that to the extent, a model should really probably be essentially static. It should really be at the point before it's deployed. And again, any type of decision-making model in a clinical trial is going to be considered incredibly high risk, right? And there's going to be a lot of regulatory input and scrutiny around the use of that model. But assuming it's considered sort of ready to go and it is okay to be used, the position that EMA at least it seems to be taking is that it needs to be static. And any, retraining or sort of tweaking of the model during the course of that trial would require some regulatory engagement. So this is certainly something that I think is going to be a challenge as different use cases continue to evolve. And as we see the regulators catching up and starting to really get more active and, engaging more with clinical trial stakeholders around the deployment of sort of decision-making type of AI in a trial, this is certainly going to be a big area to watch from a regulatory perspective.
Very good. Thank you so much for that answer and for all of the answers. However, we have reached the end of the Q&A portion for our webinar today. Now, for those interested in hearing more from Clario, you can register for their next webinars. Cutting edge data reveals improved sensitivity of PD motor progression with wearable sensors, scheduled for Wednesday, March 13th, and benefits of utilizing early precision QT and artificial intelligence powered data quality assessments in early phase trials, which is scheduled for Thursday, March 21st. I've also included links to these in the chat box. Now, if we cannot attend to your questions, know that the team at Clario will follow up with you, or if you have some further questions, you can direct them to the email address that's up on your screen now. I want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen as you exit, and your participation is appreciated as it helps us to improve our webinars. Additionally, I'm sharing a link to view the recording of today's event in the chat box, which you can also share with your colleagues so that they may register for the recording here as well. Now, please join me once more in thanking our speakers for their wonderful time here today. We hope that you all found the webinar informative. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.